Hi everybody, thanks for watching this show. I want to discuss a bit about Rudolf Steiner because I've been reading some of his lectures, and at the moment I'm studying the anthroposophic movement with some people at Rudolf Steiner House, and we got to lecture 4. Well, actually the whole of the lectures up to lecture 4 have been very interesting. He's talking about Madame Blavatsky and the Theosophical Society and how people can be easily misled into what they're looking into, what they're after. And he thinks Madame Blavatsky was herself quite, well, she was obviously ridiculed. There were some problems with the colognes and the accusations that everything she was doing was fake. From what I'm reading from Steiner, it's not her that he has the problem with. He likes her. He seems to think that she has the ability. I've done the talk about where he discusses that she's put into occult imprisonment. You can find that in my channel on the videos. But he talks about her as if he thinks she's a great character. And I think he does believe in what she has to do and that she was able to connect with the spiritual world. But what happens is that people start following this kind of lady and they want more, don't they? They want all the psychic abilities that she has. Where really in this kind of development, we're not ready to go on to that stage of creating psychic abilities. We should be working upon ourselves to develop ourselves so that we're more harmonious, more in touch with the divine. I was discussing this with some people recently about, are we trying to break the matrix or break out of the matrix? And I think Steiner and Gurdjieff were trying to show us, and Blavatsky, ways of coming out of the matrix, moving on to the next stage. And what's been happening here is that people are looking for example, in the Theosophical Society, they're looking for ways to develop psychic abilities. So I think they want to become more powerful. Maybe it make them feel more secure in what they're doing. But I find it interesting. He says here, how did the societies which base themselves on Blavatsky come to use the name Theosophical Society? One thing which did not happen when it was founded at the end of the 19th century was to found a Theosophical Society with the aim of propagating theosophy as defined in the dictionary. But a body of knowledge about the spiritual world existed through Blavatsky, which initially was simply there. Then it was found necessary to cultivate this knowledge through a society, and a society requires a name. It is pure coincidence that the societies which are based on that call themselves the Theosophical Societies. No one could think of a better name. It's as simple as that. This has to be clearly remembered. And we've got to remember what the word theosophical means. It's the study of the gods, or God wisdom, the divine wisdom coming down to us. And he goes on to discuss in this lecture about how people are divided about this. And he says, for we need to have a clear understanding that increasing numbers of people today are becoming divided in their spiritual life, something which they do not always acknowledge and which they try to paper over with a certain intellectual cowardice, but which is all the more active in the unconscious depths of their mind. And I think that is happening. There's a lot of spiritual people out there, but they're misled by education, I suppose, and their peers and such like. And we're often ridiculed for what we believe in, or what we're trying to attain. It's a rational society out there now. They don't want us discussing, the riff-raff spiritual ideas of the dead walk amongst us or the angels walk amongst us. To them it's all ridiculous. But there are people out there that have a craving for it, but they don't want to be ridiculed. They don't want to be looked to be stupid. I meet many people like that throughout the years. They poo-poo my ideas or poo-poo my look into spirituality. And then when I've got them, in a quiet corner or behind closed doors, they always come to me and tell me about something that's happened to them or something they've been feeling or how they've reconnected with their ancestors or something, or they've seen an angel or alien abduction or something like that. But they can't talk about it in open circles. They have to, and they come to me. It's not me asking them, has anything weird ever happened to you? Anything woo? No, they come to me when, like I say, in a quiet moment. So I know that there are people out there that want to do this, but they can't bring themselves to because of how they look in the public eye. And Steiner goes on to say, where is it? Because he talks about how one needs to have a clear understanding of the way in which the European peoples and their American cousins have been influenced by the educational endeavour of the last 300, 400, 500 years. One need only consider how great the difference really is between the content of today's secular education and the religious impulses of humanity. From the time people enter elementary school, all thinking, their whole inner orientation is directed towards this modern education. Then they are also provided what is meant to satisfy their religious needs, but a dreadful gap opens up between the two. People never really have the opportunity to deal inwardly with this chasm, preferring instead to submit to the most dreadful illusions in this respect. And that is true. Very little was done about religious studies when I was young. So we had, when I went to my grammar school, I had a religious education class, which I really enjoyed. One of my favourites, actually. It's one of the few O-levels I passed. And our assemblies, would say our prayers and sing some hymns. So that was still happening. And I know we're living in a multicultural world now, so it needs to be more, inclusive. But at the same time, we should be trying to teach people, make people aware of the religious or spiritual impact is on every subject, not just religion and assemblies, going to assembly or such like. If in the olden times, ancient times, religion and science would come under the same umbrella. And so I'm using the word religion here, and that has connotations itself, doesn't it, from what the educational systems put on that word. Being religious doesn't mean you necessarily have to follow a certain religious institution. You're just aware of your spirituality and that there's something more going on with the divine and your own connection. And Steiner then goes on to discuss how this raises questions about the historical process which led to the creation of this yawning chasm. Sorry, the dog's out there pulling a squeaky ball around. But this is why I wanted to talk about this lecture, because I've been noticing, as I said earlier in this little video, that people are becoming more and more in need of something spiritual, in need of something more than just the material world that we have. He reminds us that in earlier times, it was self-evident the material things and processes were not the totality, but that spirits were everywhere. People perceived a spiritual world which surrounded them in their environment. And because they found a spiritual world, they were able to understand Christ. And I would say that about most, or the other religious or religion environments, out in Islam, if people were in the lands where Islam's prevalent, you could imply that to the same thing, might not be to Christ, but to a divine being, or to Judaism or Hinduism and such like, and on and on and on, paganism. It's because they're finding a spiritual world, they're able to understand their own gods. So he says modern intellectualism makes it impossible to discover a spiritual world if one is honest, and as a consequence it is impossible to understand Christ properly. The people who try so hard to rediscover a spiritual life are very specific souls driven by two things. First, most souls who come together in this kind of societies we have been talking about start to experience a vague feeling within themselves which they cannot describe. And if this feeling is investigated with the means available in the spiritual world, it turns out to be a feeling which stems from earlier lives on earth in which a spiritual environment still existed. Today, people are appearing in whose souls something from their previous lives on earth remains active. There would be neither theosophists nor anthroposophists if such people did not exist. They are to be found in all sections of society. They do not know that their feeling is the result of earlier lives on earth, but it is, and it makes them search for a very specific path, for very specific knowledge. Indeed, what continues to have an effect is the spiritual content of earlier lives on earth. And it's making me think along this passage about how many people do go to different societies. You know, I've investigated, is that the right word? Looked into many societies during my life. I'm quite interested into why people go to societies, how societies start. Obviously, people are looking for something that's not being given to them in the everyday material world. You know, they've got that hunger and thirst in them for something more that's higher realms, higher to the hierarchy of the divine. Whereas the material world's trying to keep us here on the material plane, you know, dumbed down and just keeping us busy with our everyday lives that they want us to have, where we're people like ourselves, whether it is from an earlier incarnation or just because we know that our soul's screaming for something more. Steiner reminds us, where is it? Thus numerous souls grew up who for these reasons had quite specific needs. Time really does progress, and the people of today are not the same as people in earlier times. You must have said to yourselves, here I meet with a certain number of others in a society to cultivate spiritual truths. Why do you, each single one of you, do that? What drives you? Well, the thing which drives people to do this is usually so deeply embedded in the unconscious depths of their soul life that there is little clarity about it. But here, where we want to reflect on our position as anthroposophists, the question has to be asked. And I ask this to many people. I know it kind of... you know, I'm not being nosy. I'm trying to ask people, do you know why you're doing this spiritual path? Do you understand what your motivation is? You know, obviously I get concerned about people that might be just doing it for the crack or because they can see that they can, how do I put this? People can use it to become like a guru that has followers and they want, you know, their ego, it's an ego-driven thing, rather than a divinely spiritual, soulful-driven thing. You know, our subconscious is telling us there's more to life than this material world. And I think people should be pondering on that. That's what I'm coming to. That's why I was so pleased to see this in Steiner's lecture. I'm just going to repeat it. He says, why do you, each single one of you, do that? What drives you? You know, these are things you should be thinking about. What is it that's making you want to look for spirituality? So he's saying human beings today are affected in two ways. They can have the feeling that there is something within them which affects them, which is simply there. But even though they might know a great deal about the physical world, they cannot describe this feeling because nothing which was not of a spiritual nature has been carried over. If, however, in the present I am deprived of everything spiritual, then what has come over from a previous life remains dissatisfied. That is one aspect. Which, you know, it's true. I do see how many people, they can go and do a past life regression or something and find out they were a monk or a priestess or something like that in a past life. And that, obviously, a shade of that is continuing into this life, which is great. You know, you're continuing that spiritual impulse. And then I wonder about all the people that have no spiritual impulse, or, you know, has it been programmed out of them? Or are they the dark forces disguised as humans? You know, as Gurdjieff says, and bring a little bit Gurdjieff in here, there's a lot of soulless people out there, and Steiner says that as well. But he talks about the soulless people need to be put with soulful people to help them turn into a more considerate, loving human being that might even let them have a soul in their next reincarnation. Who knows? But that's a bit of another subject, and it's quite a difficult one, that one. Because what happens then, people then start going and judging other people out in this world and think, oh, that person's like that because he's got no soul, or that she's like that because she's got no soul. Sometimes it's not because they've got no soul, it's just the way they've been treated in life and how they've had to react to things instead of obviously acting. We're trying to learn how to act here and do things from an impartial way. So don't go out there judging people if they have souls or not. Though sometimes you are going to become aware of who has and who hasn't. But it doesn't mean you need to treat them as riff-raff, let's say. They need help as well. Everybody's developing in whatever stage they're at, and they need that little help from everybody else. We should be emulating a certain way of being that hopefully other people would see and think, yeah, I want to be like that, and work on themselves as well. And I'm not saying from an ego point of view. I'm saying from a, if we can be more harmonised in ourselves. It's like the Christian adage that St. Paul put forward and the Templars lived by, not I, but Christ in me. If you're a Muslim, I don't know what you'd have in that, because you're trying to emulate Muhammad, aren't you? Blessed be his name. Not I, but Buddha in me, and such like and I've talked before about how sometimes that pushes people away, but for others it's great for those that need the impulse, like what Steiner's talking about these people here. He says the other effect which lives in human beings is a vague feeling that their dreams should really reveal more than the physical world. It is, of course, an error, an illusion, but what is the origin of this illusion? What has risen in parallel with the development of modern learning? When people who've had the benefit of a modern education gather together in learning circles, they have to show their cultural breeding. If someone starts to talk about spiritual effects in the world, people adopt an air of ridicule because that is what being cultured demands. And that's what I meant from the beginning of this show. I should have started with that quote from Steiner. People who ridicule such things, normally it's because they're coming from, like he says here, an air of culture, what is it he says? Culture demands. And it's the same with the rational society. They've got rational demands. We can't be bringing spirituality in it. It means we're losing the logic, and everything's still logical, but on a higher plane when you're looking at things from a spiritual point of view. And he says, it is not acceptable within our school education to talk about spiritual effects in the world. To do so implies superstition and lack of education. Which is, I often get told, oh, I can't believe you do that. You're so superstitious. And a lot of things aren't about superstition. It's about trying to become aware of the higher levels of life and ourselves. And Steiner reminds us, two groups will then often form in such circles. Frequently, someone plucks up a little courage to talk about spiritual things. People then adopt an air of ridicule. The majority leave to play cards or indulge in some other worthy pursuit, but a few are intrigued. They go into a side room and begin to talk about these things. They listen with open mouths and cannot get enough of it. But it has to be in a side room because anything else shows a lack of education. So that's what I was saying about earlier. People come up to me that are normally very rational, don't want to discuss these kinds of things, will come up to me and want to discuss this, behind closed doors. Which is why secret societies started. In the ancient times it was the mystery schools, and as the mystery schools disappeared and the people were still in need of this kind of thing, so secret societies started so they could talk about this behind closed doors. And he says the things which a modern person can learn there are mostly as incoherent and chaotic as dreaming. But people love it all the same. And oh my God, don't they just love it? Many people have some very woo-woo wacky channels on YouTube or BitChute or whatever, wherever you go for your social media. And obviously on mainstream media, normally all the woo-woo's done in fictional stories like X-Files or Warehouse 13 and such like, because they know people love it. People do love the strange and the mysterious and the superstitious, because we all know deep down this is not a rationalised world. It's a world of chaos and harmony, but there's other things walking amongst us. But if spirituality was more accepted, then people could be helped more with their spiritual thoughts and ideas and not feel that they're being ridiculed or that it's woo-woo. And Steiner reminds us, which is one of the big things with New Age, is this next thing that he talks about, of the old dream reading. Why do human beings in our modern age feel the urge to investigate their dreams? Because they feel quite instinctively, without any clear understanding, that the content of their thoughts and what they see depicted in the physical world is all very nice, but it does not give them anything for their soul life. And that's what I suppose is what this little show is all about. Most of my shows on my channel, how to develop your soul and soul life and be a soulful person. There's all these people, I want to be spiritual. We need to be soulful. We need to be developing our souls and going forwards. Because there's so many views and theories as to what's going to happen to our souls. But we want to protect our souls and keep them safe and not let the dark forces grab them, which is something they want. The whole battle between the dark and the light and the good and the evil is, the divine's given us free will to do as we want. Divine's not interfered with our lives, otherwise it would be a dictatorship. But the dark forces will do everything they can to stop our connection to the divine, and that's through our soul. And so the divine set us free, do what we want. Hopefully we'll return to the divine source. That would be our mission. But the dark forces come to steal our souls. And I'm going to put a show together soon. I've been finding so much interesting stuff in ancient Egypt and ancient Holy Land myths of the creatures that steal souls. I think I did one on one of my 33 1/3 shows. I'm pretty sure I did do a Soul Hunter episode. I think it was one of the first ones, actually. We're here to protect our souls, to develop our souls as well. So, and Steiner's saying, now those souls are being born who can feel working within themselves not only impulses from their previous lives on earth, but what took place in the spiritual world in their pre-earthly existence. And again, going back to Steiner, he talks a lot about the spiritual world. The spiritual world's more important than this material world because we're going to be going back there. And we were there before we were born. The spiritual world's a continuous existence where this life on earth is a fleeting moment, fleeting time here. But we've got to make the most of it, enjoy our lives. Be a human being in flesh and blood. And he says, what was I going to say? I was going to say something about that. I'm going to try and put together more shows, or perhaps talk to Patrick about what the spiritual world is and its implications for us now. And he reminds us not only the historical processes deny them the spirit, an educational system has been constructed which is hostile to the spirit, which proves the spirit out of existence. And don't we all feel that from our education, especially in the Western world, the spirit and soul is taken out of us through our education. And bringing Gurdjieff back in, that's why he says we have to forget everything, deprogram ourselves and start again. And I think Steiner would say the same kind of thing, but maybe not in that kind of word process. And he'd be telling us to look at it with a spiritual and soulful implication. Right, so Steiner's saying, if we ask how people found a common interest in such societies as we are describing here, so all the societies where people can talk about magical stuff or spiritual stuff, soulful stuff. Right, so if we ask how people found a common interest in such societies as we are describing here, it is through these two features of the soul, namely that something is active both from their previous earth lives and from their pre-earthly existence. This is the case for most of you. You would not be sitting here if these two things were not active in you. And I'd say the same about you guys watching this show. It's not going to be people that aren't into this kind of work or development watching these shows. You've been drawn to this show and others like it because your souls wants to develop and work. You've got a soul. Even if Gurdjieff says if it's a German of a soul, you're a little seed of a soul, you're developing it. So Steiner reminds us in very ancient times, social institutions were determined by the mysteries and were in harmony with the content of their spiritual teaching. Which now, because we're going into the age of Aquarius, we've got them teachers from the Piscean age to learn from. Might not be able to find a school for ourselves, but we can still work upon ourselves because it's all there for us. And he reminds us, compare that with modern human beings. They are placed in a social context in which there is a huge gap between their inner experiences and the way they are integrated into society. It feels to them as if their souls are divorced from their bodies by social circumstances. Only they are not aware of it. It is embedded in the subconscious. Through these impulses from earlier lives on earth and pre-earthly existence, people feel connected with the spiritual world. Their bodies have to behave in a way that will satisfy social institutions. It provokes a persistent subconscious fear that their physical bodies no longer really belong to them. Well, there are modern states in which one feels that your clothes no longer belong to you because the tax man is after them. But in a larger context, one's physical body is no longer one's property either. It is claimed by society. And as many of you know, and we've been discussing over the many years, we own very little in our lives. If we read the small print in them contracts that we've signed for whatever we've bought or being born into this earth and things like that, in the material world, the cabal that runs all this owns everything. Except our souls. So this is the fear which lives in modern human beings, the fear that every day they have to give up their bodies to something which is not connected with their souls, and thus they become seekers after something which does not belong to the earth, which belongs to the spiritual world of their pre-earthly existence. All this takes its effect unconsciously, instinctively, and I would definitely agree with that. Be meeting lots of people, obviously because of the shit show of the last few years, who've suddenly become aware of this kind of thing, because something's bubbled up from their subconscious, telling them that, protect your soul, watch out for the dark forces and such like, things are changing. And it's interesting to see that. And I was going to finish with right, hold on, sorry, I've just lost my place. Right. We are like fish out of water if we are forced to live our soul life in the world, which has been conjured up for people by modern education. In the same way that fish cannot exist in air and begin to gasp, so our souls live in the contemporary environment, gasping for what they need. They fail to find it because it is spiritual in nature, because it is the echo of their experiences in life before birth in the spiritual world. They want to hear about the spirit, that the spirit exists, that the spirit is actually present amongst us, and it is. And we have like-minded souls here to help us as well, and we're trying to do this work together. So protect your souls, be spiritual, and love life.